Welcome to the Tech Deep Dive podcast, where we let our inner nerd come out and have fun getting into the weeds on all things tech. At Clarksys, we believe tech should make your life better, searching Google is a waste of time, and the right vendor is often one you haven't heard of before. Hi, I'm Max Clark, and I'm here with Holland Barry, who's the Senior Vice President of Strategic Alliances for Cyxtera. Holland, thank you for joining.
Max, thanks for having us. Good to be here.
So, Holland, we were just chatting a little bit offline, but you have an interesting kind of path into Cyxtera, and that started with an acquisition and landed you in the cybersecurity division with Cyxtera, and now and then on-demand services, and now alliances. Can you kind of give me a little bit of background of how you ended up where you are now and what your path has been?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in technology for all of my adult life. I started in my teenage years, actually. I just started a little IT consulting company with my older brother. And gosh, 27 years later, I'm dating myself. Here we are. So yeah, kind of more recently, I was with a little cybersecurity startup. It was called Catbird. We made a hypervisor-based security appliance that did a whole host of cool stuff. I won't drain our time with that, but that was one of the initial companies that was acquired as part of the formation of Cyxtera back in May of 2017. So I started out on the cyber side with the company and saw some of the cool stuff that we were working on to modernize the data center, make it feel more like a cloud experience, create an SDN fabric. I know we're going to talk about that later. And so as I was exposed more and more to what was happening with my friends over on the data center side of the business, I thought, oh gosh, this would be a nice opportunity to go and help out over there. So here I am.
Cyxtera is a relatively new company, but it's a collection of assets from really old companies with a new brand and a spin out. So what is Cyxtera now, and where did it come from, and what are these things that pieced it together?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started out back in May of 2017, and at our core, we're an enterprise co-location and connectivity company, and that was largely based on the acquisition of the CenturyLink Savvis data center footprint. So we've got 62 hybrid-ready facilities spread across 29 markets, got about 3 million square feet of data center space, and in the neighborhood of 250 megawatts of power capacity. We're the third largest provider of interconnection globally. I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 140 network providers with an average of 15 per facility, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 40,000 total cross connects. So pretty big focus on the interconnection piece of our story. And I should also note too that a majority of our data centers are within 3 milliseconds of public cloud providers. So heavily cloud adjacent. When we say hybrid ready, that's part of that statement, is the fact that we know people are going to be spreading workloads between private cloud environments, co-location environments, and that adjacency and that access to public cloud is important because we know applications or application tiers might live on both ends of that proverbial fence.
Cyxtera has a service line called CXD, and this is your, it's a Nutanix-based platform, and this is your hybrid cloud bare metal, insert marketing term here, but how would you actually describe CXD and Cyxtera speak?
Yeah, I'll try to up-level it and then make it as simple as possible. So at its foundation, that modernization effort I talked about at the top, about making our data centers a little bit more cloud-like in terms of how you consume the services. Foundationally, that's delivered by a software programmable network and SDN fabric, right? And that's really the foundation of CXD, connecting, one point in the data center to another point in a highly automated software programmable fashion. Sitting on top of the CXD network fabric, and CXD, by the way, stands for Cyxtera Extensible Data Center, is our enterprise bare metal platform. We launched with Nutanix. We've added some additional entities on the fabric, which I'll talk about in a second. But just think about it as an SDN fabric with infrastructure, services, and an ecosystem of partners that sit on top. So whether if you're one of our co-location partners or customers, or someone new to Cyxtera, you have this great platform that you can run your applications on effectively.
So CXD and the approach between CXD and this concept of enterprise bare metal and hybrid environments, the trend was very much go to the cloud, and now companies are realizing, I think, that maybe go to the cloud isn't necessarily what they want, and they want something a little bit different. So how do you view that something different, and what is Cyxtera trying to accomplish with CXD?
It's exactly what inspired us to create the platform. And I wouldn't necessarily describe us as an alternative to public cloud, although sometimes we are for people, but I like to think of us as a complement. And look, Cyxtera is a big consumer of public cloud. We had the conversation internally when we first started. It's like, hey, we've got a few acquired companies here with a mix of infrastructure all over the world, right, across multiple platforms. What makes sense to run where? And we came to the conclusion that there was a set of workloads that were perfectly suited to run up in public cloud, and we still run them there today, even though we could easily run them all. We got these big banks of infrastructures and facilities all over the world. But if I need to go do a 10,000 VM, scale test for one of our DevOps groups for a new piece of software that we're writing, that exercise is much better suited, for the public cloud. But for a steady state, kind of back end IT apps, things that are very demanding on the metal, things that might get you into some cost considerations running up in public cloud. We wanted to introduce another way to think about it. And so one of the design goals with CXDN, our enterprise bare metal platform, is to give our customers, all the financial and operational flexibility of cloud, but combine that with the control, performance, and security elements of running your local dedicated, on-prem or co-located infrastructure. And so we've kind of created this third category where it's not something that you're running in your campus data center in terms of infrastructure, and it's not something that you're running up in public cloud. It's this thing kind of in between. And that's in its essence what CXD and enterprise bare metal is.
So what I've noticed is that it's not necessarily a financial. You say financial or operational, consideration for public cloud versus something else.
Yeah.
In almost every scenario, it seems that moving to a public cloud environment is more expensive for an enterprise to take on, right? So the decision for most, I wouldn't say is we're trying to save money by moving to the cloud. We're trying to do something else or accomplish something else. And
right.
Traditionally, cloud, right, is elasticity and unpredictable workloads. You say you want to scale up a ton of VMs in order to do a DevOps test and then turn them off. You have that kind of aspect, or it's a managed platform. You want a managed database, or you want a managed object store, something like that, right?
Yep.
But what I've noticed and what we're seeing, I'm curious about what you're seeing as well, is it's really more about the operational management. Companies don't want to scale operational overhead to support lots of infrastructure globally, and cloud made that really easy for them. Like, oh, we don't need to figure out how to put somebody, in Hong Kong or fill in the blank, right? And so today when you look at CXD and enterprises coming to you, how much of it is financial now, and how much of it is operational, and what are people actually trying to solve that they talk to you about?
I think it's a combination of things. I think cost savings is the topic du jour, just because a lot of people had and still do had a cloud first strategy, and what they interpreted that to mean was go to public cloud. We have a slightly different take, which hopefully we'll get into in a second. But they got everything up in public cloud. They did their cost analysis, and then all of a sudden, the CFO's at the door with some questions because the cost predictions and then the actual costs didn't line up. And so now we're seeing a trend of repatriation that is squarely on cost. But you're right, there are some wonderful attributes of public cloud, especially the platform elements. You get a whole suite of capabilities around just, and we'll take Amazon as an example, the EC2 instance, right? You've got the hundreds of services that surround that instance to make it really easy to do kind of whatever you want. And I think that element, and that's one of the reasons that it's as attractive to us too, and why we run certain workloads there as well. But there are elements of what we talked about before, performance. There's some elements of security, and we still see that being cited as a reason why people continue to run on dedicated or co-located infrastructure. So I wouldn't say it's any one thing, but I do think cost is driving a lot of the conversations, at least that we're participating in.
When you talk about cost driving the conversation, it's not necessarily the cost of the VM. It's all these ancillary costs that people aren't factoring in that come along with the VMs, like bandwidth,
You got that right, yeah. Or maybe they selected the wrong disk type to pair with it, or the wrong type of storage volume. Maybe they're blowing through their CPU credits in a way that they didn't anticipate. So maybe there are additional, whatever that service is, that were necessary that they didn't anticipate out of the gate. So there's all these service adjacencies around the actual VM itself that can run up the bill pretty quickly. And when you're running a private cloud and on dedicated infrastructure, your costs are a bit easier to predict. We would argue.
Right, because you know how many nodes you have, what those nodes cost, if you're oversubscribing or undersubscribing those nodes, what you're I mean it's not variable at the same degree, right?
Yeah, that's right. And for us, in the way that we offer the service, we're not metering anything, right? So you can pin a bare metal compute node at red line, 100% CPU, 100% memory, 24/7, and that's on you. Same thing with our network bandwidth. And those are the things that can get you into trouble if you hadn't predicted that steady state of a workload or bandwidth utilization up in a public cloud environment. So we in particular, the way that we deliver our platform is highly predictable from a cost perspective.
Can you walk me through what the CXD platform components are now and what, the selection somebody would go through and deciding, I want, option A or option B or option C?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned at the top, we launched with Nutanix. We had a heavy slant on our catalog with HCI capable configurations to run the Nutanix software. We broadened things out a little bit in the recent quarters. So we have now options available from Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Most of those configurations in our node catalog are also HCI capable. You can just as easily run the Nutanix stack on top of them. You could also run VMware's vSAN if you wanted to. We have options from Fujitsu as well in our EMEA market, specifically our London market right now. And those as well have an HCI capable configuration to run the Nutanix stack as well. We have some upcoming things that we're going to be announcing with NVIDIA by the time this publishes. I think those will be public, so I'm comfortable talking about it. We're doing some really interesting things around GPU as a service and NVIDIA's DGX platform to kind of further thicken out the capabilities on the platform. But the core concepts all remain true, right? We want to give folks an easy way to consume enterprise-grade infrastructure, allow you to consume it and pay for it, just like a public cloud instance, and give you a dedicated single tenant access to it. And when I say dedicated, I mean all the way down to the BIOS or the IPMI, meaning you could make system level changes that could technically brick the box, but we want to give you the experience just as if you had bought it and racked and stacked it in a cage that you own and operate. And so that's the high line on some of the technology options that we're delivering that are Cyxtera branded. And then to complement that, we've partnered with a number of companies, and that community continues to grow, that also have services that sit on top of the CXD networking fabric. So we've got a great storage partner called Zadara. If you need to go get a petabyte of object storage for a week, they can do that. And you can plumb the network. So maybe you got 5 HPE ProLiant DL360 servers from Cyxtera. You can then pair that storage from Zadara, all using that same automated networking plumbing, and make that environment look like one logical together stack of infrastructure, just as if you went and built it yourself. But what we saved you from doing is actually having to not only define and buy cage space within one of our co-location facilities, but also procure that IT gear, get it shipped, rack it, stack it, provision it, all that kind of stuff. And, most of us know we'll see in 60 to 90 days once you start that process. Where our vision is you should be able to stand up a data center environment within a day or two and leverage all these on-demand services that we're delivering as part of our platform, as part of our marketplace.
And for clarity, when you say HCI, you're talking about hyperconverged infrastructure where the node has a compute and RAM and storage and everything is in one box. You can build blocks of those boxes together.
You got that right. And sorry for the acronym soup here. I have a tendency to go there. So yeah, we'll unpack those as I let them fly.
You talk about like data center, how quickly can you build a data center and stand up a data center, and what is the actual impact to companies, right? So data centers are expensive to build. I mean, just the floor space is expensive to build. And if enterprises are still maintaining a computer room, I mean, that's a lot of investment in order to build those things out. And of course, they're sticky and they're fixed capacity, and you can only have so much power, and the expansion is really hard. So that was the initial push into co-location markets, right? Like, hey, it's expensive for you to build your own data center, so come to our data center. And then that became like, well, it's complicated or expensive or time consuming to maintain server infrastructure, so go to the cloud. But then the cloud becomes expensive, so now it's okay. Well, here kind of come back and you're like 1 foot in a data center and 1 foot in the cloud, right? I mean, that's basically what we're talking about.
Yeah, and look, we're saying do both, just like we're doing. We are practicing what we preach. That's exactly right. And so, to the extent that we can remove some of those complications of having that dedicated infrastructure while retaining some of those benefits that people have become accustomed to with public cloud, I think we're going to delight our customers.
So and operationally, you get into all the the fun things of okay, you have to ship how many pallets of gear to a facility in Ashburn, Virginia, and then hire somebody locally in that market that can go and unpack those boxes and cable those boxes. And oh, whoops, you forgot to buy DAC cables, so you have to wait for the those to show up, and or SFP is incorrect, and or
right.
What I think what people see a lot is just the warranty management of equipment. Cycling oh, we're 2 years into this box and something died on the motherboard, and who's going to be there to let a tech in to go replace this motherboard component? So, in this with CXD, you're taking all of that off of the customer's plate, and they get resources, but they don't have to physically manage those resources.
That's absolutely correct. And there's one other element that I think is important to point out when you're talking about that DIY approach of building out a co-location cage versus something like a CXD platform, which is that notion that you sort of have to build to a perceived peak on what the demands of that application are going to be, out of the gate, and then maybe a few quarters into the future. And with CXD on our enterprise bare metal platform, you can break the bulk of that typical build to peak IT procurement and design process and just order a node at a time. So maybe you're standing up a VDI environment and out of the gate there's going to be 500 users. Well, you might only need 8 of our servers to do that out of the gate. And then, but you're in growth mode, you're hiring a bunch of folks, and that environment and that footprint is going to need to expand up to maybe the equivalent of needing 20 servers, over the course of a year. Well, most people are just going to buy all 20 of those servers, rack them in a cage, and have some of that infrastructure sitting idle, and that capital kind of sitting idle as well that could have been deployed elsewhere. And our thesis is that if you utilize the way that we built the platform, start with that minimal set of servers, and if you need one tomorrow, cool, go to the portal, click a few buttons, and you can get one. And then if in a month later you need 3 more, same exercise, that capital that you would have deployed at that build to peak exercise up front can then be hopefully used for more interesting things.
So what are the contract cycles with that? I mean, if you're going and you say, no, I need to add a node, go click and add a node. I mean, is this something that's provisioned as a month-to-month basis? I mean, you can get into terms for discounts. How does somebody consume this?
Yeah, the typical term for one of our enterprise bare metal nodes is a year. If you think about the profile of applications that are running on these are long-standing, steady state, back-end IT, critical production infrastructure, although we do have some DevOps folks on the platform as well, and it's perfectly suited for that. We do have some shorter terms under a year, but typically a year is the default, and with 3 years not being uncommon either. And obviously there are discounts as you commit to longer time periods.
Nutanix was a hyperconverged infrastructure box, right? This HCI infrastructure, but then they also had this idea of you were going to bring your own, platform on top of it. You're going to run VMware on top of Nutanix or something else, or Kubernetes is really popular. So when somebody's making that decision of do I want to run Nutanix or HPE or Fujitsu? I mean, is that something that they're selecting, or you're talking to them and saying, okay, what are you running? You want to run Kubernetes? You should run this because it makes more sense for you.
Yeah, just like we're the infrastructure folks, right? So that persona of saying, "Gosh, building a data center is hard." That's really our expertise, right? We're great at power and cooling and air displacement and physical building security and all that stuff. And I think we're pretty good at the physical infrastructure piece as well. So networking and physical hardware boxes. As we start to move up the stack, though, we tend to allow our customers to make that choice. We have opinions. We've got great engagement from the OEMs that we work with, HP, Nutanix, Fujitsu, et cetera. But once we start getting to the hypervisor and the workloads above, we tend to start bringing in the folks that are just simply better at it than we are. So what we do in our portal or with our complementary set of APIs that we use for provisioning is we'll allow the user to select a hypervisor. Right now, we offer Nutanix's Acropolis and VMware, and we will include those images. We'll image the boxes with those hypervisors. You can also choose an OOS option, and that's just to kind of get the box, bootstrapped and up and running. So, especially if you already have an existing environment, co-location or existing enterprise bare metal, you can quickly add that resource to the resource pool and start motioning VMs over to it. But we do that more as a courtesy and less as something in an advisory role. So we give you the choice, But it's really on the customer and their partners to make that decision on what the best route is. And there's merits to argue all day long about why VMware versus Acropolis and the Nutanix ecosystem. I think Nutanix has done a fabulous job at building up feature parity with what VMware is built. But as you know, a lot of people have written automation around the VMware APIs, and there might be certain features that they just need in one platform versus the other. And we definitely leave that to the customer.
I think that also probably depends a lot on, as you say, it depends on the customer, what the customer's existing application is, and what they're managing. You get into like web scale environments or data science, it's not going to be running on VMware or Nutanix. That's not they want to do something different. If you're giving IPMI access, you're like, okay, here's IPMI, go do whatever you want with this box now, right? That's basically what you're saying.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And so for those folks that are running, Kubernetes and Docker or whatever container flavor they like, they're going to be throwing CentOS or Ubuntu or RHEL or something on the box. And we don't want to be so prescriptive to say, you must use this environment in this way. And that's been our philosophy with the platform in general, right? We don't want to force you to use our VLAN scheme, right? All of the layer 2 networking segments that the customer gets to define are encapsulated within a VXLAN. So they can bring their own VLANs, bring your own layer 3 space, bring your own IPs, public, or private. We support BGP. So really, this is a bit of a blank infrastructure canvas for our customers to build whatever they want on. And we're trying not to put a ton of guardrails around that so people don't feel constricted with how we design the platform.
Is CXD available now across Cyxtera's entire, environment, your portfolio of data centers, or you're still in phase of rolling this out?
We're still in the phases of rolling it out. We have it available. I think we're in 8 markets now. And when I say a market, that market could be comprised of multiple data centers. As an example, out here in Silicon Valley, we've got 7 data centers, right? So when we roll out in the market, we roll it out to all of the data centers. So we have dark fiber running between all of our facilities, and the platform is present in all of them. You have access to, whether you're in data center A or data center B, it's all available. The compute infrastructure is available, the network's available, our partners are available. So I would say over half of our data centers have it right now, and almost every single one of them is on the roadmap to get it.
If I was an existing Cyxtera data center customer, it sounds like moving into CXD would be very easy. Create a cross connect in the facility, plug into the platform. Now I have additional, compute nodes available to me that we can scale up as we need it or scale down, whatever our profile would look like to our existing infrastructure. If we're outside of a Cyxtera data center and we're in a cloud environment, or maybe we're in a different facility, what does that interconnection or that networking side of it look like? Is this driven to public interconnect? Is it driven to, some sort of a cloud interconnect fabric? Or are you talking about bringing in additional layer 2 transport circuits between buildings? What happens?
Yeah, so the easiest way to get connected into the environment, and look, we have a multitude of ways to do it, just given the footprint of the network providers that we have in every building. But the easy button, and we wanted to make sure we have this available out of the gate, is we made available as part of the core CXD offering a Cyxtera branded service called IP Connect. This is a blended bandwidth service that's behind the scenes is comprised of 2 top tier providers, so think like Level 3 and CenturyLink and Zayo and the like. Right? We can tie that in a software defined fashion back to the fabric and pair your dedicated infrastructure to it. And then you can use layer 3 type services to get into those nodes. That could be landing an IPsec tunnel or setting up an open VPN server. That could be, using NAT and opening up SSH. So, port 22 can come straight over the internet. Some security folks might wince at that, but we give you those options. So it's the combination of the CXD networking fabric, the bare metal sitting on top, and then that IP Connect service. All those ingredients mixed together will allow for a non-Cyxtera customer to come in and get access to that newly provisioned gear and then pair it with whatever environment they want to in a multitude of ways. But that IP Connect service is the easy button.
When we go through data center sizing and costing exercises, right? You get into how much floor space do you need? How many racks do you need? There's a lot of moving pieces, server equipment, switches, and you get into some point operational overhead. What is your human cost of these things? What's your warranty? What's your logistics? How many spares do you have? That list kind of keeps going and going and going. But if you look at it and you say, okay, in a normal cycle, maybe a company is buying a lot of gear and they're leasing it for 3 years, but they're assuming a 4 or 5 year life cycle for that gear. So at some point that equipment comes out of a cash flow. There's not a cash flow component to maintain that equipment for the equipment anymore. I mean, there still is for the data center and everything else, but the financials change. I mean, there's a pretty significant, when you look at a 4 or 5 year total cost for a server in a cabinet, that changes. So when we talk about CXD and we look at these things and look at your terms, how do you match those with customers with what they're used to from a finance perspective? And as equipment ages, are you replacing the equipment? Are they up? Are we talking about refresh cycles? Are they talking about, at some point they own the gear? Are they the cost changes? I mean, what can somebody expect?
Yeah. So the platform, I'll just wanted to state that it's relatively new. I think we're about 18 months into having it in production and actually having a web GUI. So we haven't hit that first refresh cycle. But what we're anticipating is that around that 3-year mark, people are going to start saying, hey, I want to get the new thing, right? And so our plan is to refresh our node fleet to have the new thing. And then instead of the traditional IT procurement motion, which is I'm going to go buy the new ones, we're just going to allow people to trade them in and motion their VMs, or they're not using VMs, migrate their environment over to the new stuff. And so that saves them from, at year 3, a spike in that capital outlay where they need to go buy the new stuff. We're just saying we already have it there. You're just going to subscribe to the new stuff, re-up on your term, whatever that was, and motion your environment over.
I mean, has there been discussion about maybe people want to stay on the old hardware and what that would mean in terms of a financial impact for them?
Yeah, I mean, stay on the old hardware that's sitting on our enterprise bare metal service.
Yeah, so like if it was your equipment, right, your bare metal, and you have a customer who's been on that infrastructure for 3 years, and what happens like year 4? Like maybe they'd say, "Yeah, this is working fine, and can we get a better, a better financial?" The equipment's been depreciated. It's been there for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we since we haven't hit that yet, we haven't gone through this. But what I anticipate that we'll do, if someone says, "Look, I love this gear. It's working fine. Can we renegotiate? Maybe get a better rate?" I think we're going to be absolutely open to that conversation. And they'll have the choice. And what we're certainly not going to do is say, "Sorry, we're bringing in all the new stuff, and your stuff's out. You got to use the new stuff," because we know that there might be some functionality on a certain rev of hardware that might be critical to running their application. We're not going to put them in a bad spot. So I think you hit it on the head that we'll be having a conversation with these folks who want to remain on the last generation of gear, and it's probably going to be financially beneficial to them if they choose to do so.
Hi, I'm Max Clark, and you're listening to the Tech Deep Dive podcast. At Clarksys, we believe tech should make your life better. Searching Google is a waste of time, and the right vendor is often one you haven't heard of before. With thousands of negotiated contracts, Clarksys has helped hundreds of businesses source and implement the right tech at the right price. If you're looking for a new vendor and want to have peace of mind knowing you've made the right decision, visit us at clarksys.com to schedule an intro call. So, I mean, network takes some time to establish and figure out, what kind of connectivity we have. Are we bringing up, a layer 3 service or an internet-based product, or we need private connectivity? But I mean, how long does it actually take to provision, CXD from scratch? Like we say we're going to go, we're not a customer yet. We want to turn it on. Like what does that cycle actually look like in real?
Yes. I'm going to start out an answer with an answer. It's the start of all great answers, which is it depends.
Yeah, of course.
So I would say one of the longer pieces in that process is it has nothing to do with technology. It's all about legal contracts and MSAs and lawyers sending back and forth red lines for contracts and things like that.
Oh, come on. Lawyers never take a long time with these processes.
I know. I don't want to insult any of our lawyer friends in the audience. But, the truth is, the larger the organization, the longer that's just going to take, right? Lawyers are going to find a piece of language that they want to argue about with us, and that's fine, and we're used to it. But it's going to insert massive latency into that spin up process. So assuming we can get through that MSA contract negotiation phase relatively quickly, and we can kind of get them on board as a customer, which we can do relatively quickly. We could stand up somebody in, let's say, I don't know, I'm gonna say 10 days, 10 business days would be a good run. And I'm factoring a few things in, right? It's a new platform. We have to do some training. There's always some discovery, I'll say, around connecting someone's VPN since they're going to be coming in externally, right? Or just getting that external connectivity going, training them up. So being up and workload ready, assuming that we can shorten that legal process time, maybe down to a handful of days, we can get you workload ready in 10 days from a technology standpoint. And let me give you the alternate of that. If you're already a Cyxtera customer and you have one of our CXD ports, which is your gateway out to the fabric, I could get you a piece of infrastructure in under an hour. I can provision an HPE node and get a layer 3 address on the ILO port and stretch a network from your cage to your CXD port. I mean, it's literally an hour. I can provision one of those IP Connect services to get you out to the internet up to 5 gigs in about 60 seconds. So it's not really a technology conversation in terms of timeframes. It's all the other stuff.
So IP Connect is interesting because Cyxtera at inception was carrier neutral. We talk about carrier density and providers that are in your facility, but not everybody wants a carrier neutral environment, right? I just want you to take care of everything for me. So I mean, IP Connect, I would assume, came out of that place of how do we give a customer the ability to not have to think about this stage and rapid provision. And then you said, up to 5 gig. What are like the boundaries of IP Connect, and at what point do we go back and say, okay, you need 100 gig interconnect, go talk to CenturyLink or go talk to Azeo or go talk to somebody else? I mean,
yeah, you hit the nail on the head with kind of the easy button and just, hey, we don't want to think about this piece, provision it. But I don't see a lot of our customers using our IP Connect circuit as like their primary method of delivering their application, although some might. And look, it's redundant. It's going out to 2 different providers with redundant fiber paths, and everything's redundant, even to the CXD port. It's a dual fiber handoff. So you have redundancy kind of all the way outside of our walls and through however the provider has architected their fiber network. That being said, we're seeing IP Connect used more as a complement to existing connectivity, especially for existing customers, right? So maybe they're experiencing a service degradation with their main IP transit provider. 60 seconds, we can get you spun up and you can have another path into your environment or another way to make your application more available. I see it more as a complement to the buffet of carriers that we have in our data center and less of it as an alternative to, although some people might be using it that way. But at the end of the day, it's still traversing at least 2 of those existing carriers. So it's not like they're cut out of the equation. It's just the path in which that traffic is taking to get to those carriers might be a little different.
In the past, Nutanix wasn't necessarily a super flexible hardware platform, and they had a relatively defined spec of what a Nutanix node looked like. HPE, a little bit more flexible. I mean, we start talking about a customer application and a spec for hardware. I mean, how flexible can you be in provisioning infrastructure? And then if a customer has a custom build that they want a very specific thing, I mean, at some size, they'd say, hey, we want, 1,000 physical machines. I'm sure you would do it. But that I would assume also impacts your ability to rapidly provision additional nodes. So like, how do you balance those two and what is, what's available for people?
It's a great question. When we went to market with this to see kind of what people are using, what are maybe some common configs to support the applications running on top, and let's build a standard node catalog that's available on demand to match those application profiles. And we started with one thing and we got smarter as we engaged more customers, and we made some augmentations to the catalog, and that included the introduction of a small handful of non-HCI variants. We noticed that some people just needed a utility node. They didn't need all the functionality or capabilities with a hyperconverged stack. They don't need a ton of local disk. They're not going to be pairing it with anything else. This is like maybe a low impact, low criticality server. So we've introduced those options as well to the catalog. And so that's kind of what's standard right now. We have, I think, somewhere around 15 different configs that hit, I would say, the upper end of all available configs on a compute node. They're more enterprise grade. And that's why we call the platform in part enterprise bare metal. These are not low core count, low memory, inexpensive servers. I'll say these are very much tooled for the enterprise. So, that's what we stock. That's what's available on demand. But we frequently have conversations with customers. We're saying, hey, this doesn't hit the mark. We need something else. And we don't really have a size threshold. If someone wants something custom, they're going to lose out a little bit on that on demand portion or benefit of the platform. They're going to lose out a little bit on if they needed to rapidly expand. Say they wanted 6 custom nodes, right, that didn't conform to the specs of our node catalog, and they need to add 3 more in 3 months. That's something that will go buy for them and rack on the fabric. It just might take us 30 days to do so. They're not going to be able to get it in an hour. And that's totally fine. And a lot of customers are totally comfortable with that. Some customers say, hey, we're going to go custom nodes and we'll give you a forecast. And that's okay too. So we certainly don't need a big dollar figure to go have a custom node conversation with the customer.
Something I've seen a lot when people start moving out of a cloud environment back into a physical environment is sizing. Not really knowing. I mean, none of these public cloud vendors really make it very easy for you to understand what the underlying infrastructure hardware is, that you're running on, right? They mask it in some way, vCPU or some other kind of esoteric terminology, right? So when we go into these physical back to physical migrations, you get into these dialogues of how many CPU sockets do we need? How many cores do we need? Are we running Intel? Are we running AMD? How much RAM do we need per core? How much disk do we need? Is it SSD? Is it not? Is it NVMe? How much network do we need? Is it 10 gig, 25 gig? What's the actual stack look like? As somebody is going through that transition, right? That a lot of that becomes a little bit of experimentation. Like, we're going to run this application on this box. How does it work? Oh, we need to tweak these knobs a little bit. How do they go through that cycle with Cyxtera?
Yeah, so luckily there's been a host of solutions that have popped up to help with this process, right? So you can size something for the three big public clouds, and then you can also get kind of like the equivalent of what you might need if you're running on-prem. We'll forget about the hypervisor type, for that part of the conversation. But in addition to that, and I'll use Nutanix as an example, they've got a great sizer tool. You can go to their website and plug in a bunch of stuff, and they can give you a rough idea based on a number of inputs, what type of box you should get, factoring in oversubscription and all the things that you'd expect. So I think today it's much easier than it was even a couple of years ago when people are like, gosh, I don't even know where to start. What am I need to run this thing? So I would argue that there's great tools out there to help make an informed decision.
And so in that case, if they came in, they say, okay, we've got this, we want box 2C in your catalog. And they start there, and they, run a workload for 30 days, and they say, this is not the right size hardware for us. We want to switch. Is that something that they can do?
Yeah, and typically in those situations when they're not absolutely sure about what they want, we'll say, hey, let's just do a 30-day trial. We'll get you stood up. You don't have to pay us anything, and let's see how it goes. And if we need to change, we'll change. So we typically embrace kind of that collaborative spirit on let's get it right out of the gate and not make it hard for you if we got it wrong for some reason.
What size companies are using CXT today, and what is their, what's an average environment for you now? I mean, we're talking about like, a handful of nodes, dozens of nodes, hundreds of nodes. Like, what are you actually seeing deploying in real life?
It's definitely on the lower end of the scale. It's not hundreds, although we do have some opportunities we're working on that are very much in the hundreds. But since it's a newer platform, and since a majority of our current customers, we've got about 2,300 customers spread across the planet, tend to be on the larger enterprise side of things. 80%, I think, plus of our customer base is enterprise. And I think we've got like 33% of Fortune 100 sitting with us. So if you think about their appetite for a new cutting edge technology, it's typically a little bit later in the adoption cycle. So, we get people saying, hey, we're gonna take this one environment and we're gonna try it out on CXD. And that could be just a few clusters, right? That could be 12, 16 nodes. But we also have SMBs in our data centers too. And they're saying, hey, we just need a cluster. We have this one environment. So it's up for a tech refresh. We don't want to spend the cash. And this seems like a better model. And for whatever reason, we can't or don't want to run it up in public cloud. So I think we're starting small as people get used to us. And I anticipate, just given what I see in our pipeline, that'll grow into that higher end. But I think our sweet spot is going to be in the dozens if I were to predict kind of long term.
We're talking about this from like public cloud to, physical migrations, but doing physical server to virtualized server migrations as well. I mean, it's really surprising, I think, when you go through that process and you watch an enterprise go through that process, just how efficient modern hardware is when you start virtualizing physical servers onto a platform like VMware and Nutanix, and just what that compression actually looks like in terms of physical servers. I mean, 6 servers, 6 cutting edge modern HCI Nutanix nodes. I mean, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of VMs that can come on these machines.
Absolutely. The consolidation ratios, and obviously it all comes down to the workload type, but lightweight VDI instances, I mean, you could on one box, you could be talking to an 80-to-1 consolidation ratio, 100-to-1 consolidation ratio. So yeah, it's beyond impressive. and you can be extremely efficient with how you do those consolidations. And with a platform like ours, you don't have to worry about pinning that infrastructure either from a compute standpoint or a network standpoint, up in its red zone, because there's no metering. And another thing I wanted to point out too, in terms of efficiency and kind of cost considerations, is if you are generating a big center of gravity, data gravity on that infrastructure, you don't have to worry about if one day you want to take it out from Cyxtera and go put it somewhere else. There's no notion of an egress fee with us, as is not true with some of the other platforms. So as you extrapolate your data usage down maybe 3-5 years, you don't have to have that worry. And I think that is a consideration that you do need to think about with other platforms.
So your partnership with NVIDIA, and talking about GPU compute, I mean, I go to a very specific application list very fast. So I'm curious what's driving this for you guys, and what you saw is like, we need to get into this side of the house.
Yeah, it's very much where we're starting. And NVIDIA, their hardware and software platform, has a lot of different applications, as you know, across a lot of different verticals. But the one that we chose to start with was definitely AI and machine learning. We got on this journey with NVIDIA last July, I believe it was, by having a handful of our data centers certified as what they call DGX ready. It's one of their programs. And that basically just says that we have the environmentals, the cooling, the power capabilities to support these high performance compute nodes, right, that might consume many more kilowatts than what's standard per rack. And as we went through that certification process and started engaging our customers, we started to see demand signals saying, gosh, we're running a lot more, we'll just call them GPU enabled compute nodes. And they're like, okay, well, that's interesting. What are you doing on them? And inevitably, the conversation led to AI and machine learning. And this has applications everywhere: government, fintech, automotive, oil and gas, you name it. And these are all the folks that are sitting in our data centers anyways. And so then we started to say, okay, well, what are some of the challenges to adoption today? Where are people kind of running into headwinds? And, as you know, some of these systems from NVIDIA, especially their DGX systems, can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so we said, well, what if that was available, in an on-demand offering, delivered in an automated fashion on our SDN fabric, and people could subscribe to them and take advantage of those efficiencies of being able to run it unencumbered in terms of resource monitoring and the associated billing. What would you think about that, Mr. Customer? And it was a resounding, yeah, that sounds really interesting. So we're starting out small-ish with the NVIDIA relationship. We're targeting some very specific verticals, but really we're seeing a blossom of AI and ML related use cases and workloads. And that's the space that we're hoping to help our customers with out of the gate. There's a whole other set of conversations that are likely to occur around gaming and just generally GPU-enabled workloads, which seem to be taking off in a bunch of different directions. But right now, we're going to try to cut our teeth and get the AI ML piece right, and then we'll expand from there.
I mean, this goes back to a financial conversation from two sides, right? Are you investing the capex to buy this, or are you currently running this workload somewhere else? And when we talk about public cloud vendors and we look at actual cost, true cost in public clouds, data egress is a big factor for a lot of people. I mean, more than they would expect it to be. But the data science and machine learning pipelines for companies, I mean, these are massive cost centers in cloud environments, and I've seen a lot of companies carve out just the machine learning data science workloads and shop those around and find different providers and see primary platforms in one cloud and machine learning in another cloud, and I think that's become a very common kind of expectation of we're going to start chunking those things up and taking that out of cloud entirely and bringing it back into a physical environment that the customer doesn't have to operate. I mean, that's a very interesting opportunity, for conversation, and also a lot of value you're presenting, because people have this problem now of like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in spend to maintain these things that are unpredictable and cost variable and, not CFO friendly, right? Like, I mean, it seems like a really good match for you.
It certainly feels like it. And look, nod an acknowledgement to public cloud. Sometimes that's the right place to start. But then as you start needing more GPU nodes, need to cluster them together, you start forecasting that data expansion. at some point there's a strong argument to be made that maybe at least some of this should reside in a dedicated environment that's not so metered. But yeah, we're trying to cater to initially out of the gate the data scientist community who at the end of the day just want to train their models and get their application off the ground, and they're more than happy to go take the credit card and consume up in public cloud. But at some point, the CFO shows up and says, "What's going on here? This is looking pretty expensive." And I think we're going to be a really attractive alternative to that, being able to run at a fraction of the cost.
Obviously, Cyxtera is still a very much a data center company, and you offer different flavors of that in different markets. And CXD is, I was very excited when I saw this announcement, and it was something that I think you bring a lot of value to market. And we see now more and more, conversations. Multi-cloud's been a conversation for a long time, but it's not many people are in multi-cloud, right? And hybrid cloud became a conversation, and now we're starting to see movement into bare metal, and it feels like you're in the same boat where you're seeing conversations and customers that went from colo to public cloud now coming back, but not wanting to be in colo anymore. And this is like where you started from, and where you're just like going full circle back, right? We were colo, then went public cloud, now we're back colo, but now it's kind of like quasi in the middle. It's funny to think about it in that way.
Yeah, it very much is. And look, everything comes in cycles. We think we're well positioned to take advantage of this next cycle, which is very much having a bunch of choices and being able to architect a solution that's right for your company, right for your workloads. And we feel like that what we've created is something that was missing in the market. And at the end of the day, we're just here to give our customers choices.
Now, when you said about like your partner ecosystem that are available on CXD, I mean, this was like, storage was your example, the first one that came up. What else kind of like, categories are available to somebody on the partner platform?
Yeah, so right now we're, I'd say storage, the compute, obviously. We've got a nice ecosystem of connectivity, whether those are network service providers or SDN providers. We've got a great relationship with Megaport as an example, Packet Fabric, folks of that nature. But in the queue to come and join the CXD party are technology vendors in a number of different categories. So think security, think networking, right? Anything that can be addressable, via layer 2 or layer 3 that we can plug an Ethernet cable to has the opportunity to be delivered as a service on our platform. And the end state vision that we're trying to accomplish is the full ability for you to be able to deploy, say you need to rapidly expand into a new market as a company, or say you need to set up a new availability zone for your X as a service platform, whatever it is. Wouldn't it be great if you could just go to a portal and start clicking a bunch of buttons and basically design a data center and then have all of that come to life, all programmed via API and be available so you can, move your container images or your VMs over there, and now all of a sudden you're up and running, taking a 6-month process, maybe down to a couple of days. If we do our job right, you'll be able to do that.
So if I have a partner, I have an application or a need for one of your partners, is this something that you're enabling the connectivity to it and I can provision that in the portal? Or is this something where actually, do I have to go out and establish bring the lawyers in and negotiate an MSA and then go that way? Or is this like, I already have an MSA with Cyxtera for CXD and you're billing me and I can go click on a button and say, hey, I need this thing, and just turn it on, and Cyxtera bills me and I don't have to deal with that again?
Yeah. I'll go back to my wonderful answer starter again. It depends. So we do have some services that we can resell, a small handful. So that would sit on Cyxtera paper to save you from having to go negotiate another contract. But really what we're doing behind the scenes is enabling the connectivity, layer 2 specifically connectivity out to this ecosystem of partners. And so you would go into our web-based command center portal and say, like, I want to connect over to, connectivity provider X, storage provider Y, and we will basically send a friend request to them. And there's a little bit of back and forth, pretty simple, but to establish that relationship, we don't want people to be able to roguely just attach to each other. So we have some safeguards within that process. But at the end of that short process, we effectively stretch one or more layer 2 segments through our CXD fabric, through those VXLANs that are dedicated just to that customer and that partner. And then they can transact and consume that service in whatever way they want. So the magic really is the automated connection from A to B within the facility. And then the commercial relationship that sits on top kind of varies depending on the nature of our relationship with the partner.
So infrastructure as a service, so IaaS became a really popular marketing thing. And really what that was, some sort of private cloud platform, multi-tenant environment that then a service provider, an MSP, was managing and providing services for. And you guys are very different because we're not talking about you providing any services to the customer outside of this infrastructure is available to you, do whatever you want to with it. So when I think about, enterprises and where these, other fits, we talk about existing Cyxtera customers, but then we also talk about, if an enterprise has infrastructure in a data center today that maybe is already VMware, they're running VMware, or they're running, Cisco's platform, or they're running these different things because they want to have offsite in a colo, and not go through a refresh cycle in the future. Cyxtera would be a really good, interesting option for them because they would still manage it and they would still maintain it. It would just be, they don't have to support the data center. They don't have to drive bodies there. They get all these other ancillary benefits around it on top of your platform. That's kind of what I'm hearing you say.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. And it brings up a good point of distinction that I'll underscore again, which is while we manage the network and we do some management of the hardware because the compute nodes specifically are sitting in a secure cage that only Cyxtera folks have access to. If a drive goes out, a proc goes bad, memory stick goes bad, we're out doing those break fix things, right? But then we start moving up the stack into the application and the hypervisor layer or whatever. For those customers who don't want to do that type of thing, by themselves or with us, because we're probably there troubleshooting alongside them, because sometimes a hardware issue can manifest as a software issue, so we just don't know what it is. So we'll be on the phone with them. But a lot of folks do want to have a managed environment, and in fact, we've got a great relationship with a number of MSPs. I'll call out Sirius Computer Solutions because they were one of our first. We partner tightly with them. In fact, they've built an HCI as a service platform on top of our CXD platform. And so you can go get that full managed experience all the way up to the stack and all the adjacencies. Maybe you need a SIEM, maybe you need managed firewall. They do everything. And, we're just kind of this partner that's in the background silently powering that engagement for the managed partner. But yeah, those folks are critical to us because we can't do everything. We've chosen not to do everything when it comes to managing these environments. And that neutrality, I think, has served us well because it doesn't put us in competition with our various partners.
Give me a ballpark, and I'm going to answer a lot of the "it depends" questions here before I ask you the rest of the questions, right? So if you think about it from base infrastructure, right? You're talking about a company that's either wants to go from a physical to virtual, or they're doing a refresh in their existing virtual environment, and they know their nodes. Let's just call it 3 nodes, right? They need 3 nodes. It's an HCI environment. They're in a relatively vanilla configuration, dual socket, some number of core. An average amount of RAM, an average amount of, of SSD or NVMe drives. Like, what would they expect? What's that kind of like, ballpark range of what they would be looking at to come over into, a Cyxtera 60?
May I ask for how long they would want that environment?
Let's call it 3 years.
Okay. Yeah,
it's enterprise, right? So assume 3 years, right?
Yeah. I would say, let's call it somewhere between, I'm going to give you a mid-range here, $800 to $1,000 a month, something like that.
Per node or for the entire kit and caboodle?
Per node, but what's included with that is all of the networking infrastructure, top of rack, core, kind of everything. That's all of the, I'll call it smart hand services, which is us doing all that hardware break fix in the background. That's all the power, cooling, kind of all those other inputs that we might factor into charging a co-location customer to come be one of the denizens in our buildings. That's all included. And I think that's that power input's a big thing that I think people miss. Because they may say, oh gosh, for $800 a month, well, I could go lease this and it would maybe be $650 a month if I did a straight lease. It's like, yeah, but what about everything else? What about that top of rack switch you got to buy? What about the fact that it's sucking down, 500 watts or 800 watts of energy? I can translate into that real cost. And so all of a sudden, that cost per node at $800 is looking pretty good. So that's one of the things that we have to sometimes remind our customers, that there's a lot built into that node cost, because you're not having to think about anything. You're not having to think about building security. You're not having to think about the fact that, we've got 3 layers of power redundancy, 14, providers of fiber sitting at the edge of the building, and all these things add up to, I think, a pretty nice value add, and certainly hard costs that they'd incurred if they had to go and solve it themselves.
So you're saying 800 to 1,000 as a rough kind of like mid-tier ballpark, right? So we say $2,400 to $3,000. When you compare that to a data center, after after you have cabinet space and power and cross connects and network services and start factor. I mean, just that alone, somewhere in that like $1,800 to $2,500 a month target. I mean, you're already there. You're not talking about buying equipment. I mean, so I would say that's incredibly competitive when it comes actually into what is a total cost of supporting a data center environment, and not factoring in like, can you have somebody physically local that can drive to the facility and go do, physical maintenance?
Right, and which we can do as well. But yeah, so for that fictional 3-node cluster at $2,400 a month, I think that's a pretty good deal. And let's pretend for a second too, and this is a huge differentiator for us compared to almost every other bare metal platform, is that let's say you had a technology stack that needed to sit adjacent to those compute nodes, because we know it takes more than a compute node to launch a workload, right? You might be a Juniper shop or a Palo Alto shop or a Fortinet shop, and you might want to have their security stack deployed alongside of it. You might have an SD-WAN solution. You might have some exotic networking equipment. Maybe you have an old AS400 that needs to interact with this cluster. Whatever it is, well, we've got CXD-enabled cages and environments that we can set up that we can pair with those compute nodes too, and it'll all work together as if it's sitting right next to each other on the same LAN effectively, right? But then you still get a lot of the benefits of us being able to do smart hand stuff. We're happy to come in if you got a red blinking light or you need us to jiggle a cable because something's not working, but it's that AS400 might be collecting dust. You might need a little, one of those cans of air at the back or whatever. We can do that kind of stuff too. So you get a lot of extra possibilities with the platform if you need to pair it, with our services or some gear that you want to send us and have stand up alongside.
Those AS400s are going to be running until the end of the internet. I don't think we're ever going to see the end of those things.
They're going to outlast you and me, that's for sure.
Oh, 100%. So, well, Holland, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed this. It was great.
Likewise, Max. This is fun.
Yeah, I look forward to doing this again, in the future.
I hope so, man. Happy to come back anytime. Appreciate you having us on.
Thanks for joining the Tech Deep Dive podcast. At Clarksys, we believe tech should make your life better. Searching Google is a waste of time, and the right vendor is often one you haven't heard of before. We can help you buy the right tech for your business. Visit us at clarksys.com to schedule an intro call.